The night road begins as a ribbon of dull silver, the fog pressed low as if trying to muffle what's coming. Somewhere between the last neon of Santa Rosa and the black hills beyond, a pair of headlights slows. A teenage girl stands at the shoulder, backpack slouched, hair damp with mist, thumb out like a small brave flag. She leans toward the window when it rolls down. The driver smiles. A door opens. Tires hiss. The night exhales and keeps the secret. Northern California in the early 1970s wanted to believe the world was generous. Freedom was a right of youth. Hitchhiking was part custom, part necessity, part dare. You stuck out your thumb because there was no bus, because your friend lived 2 towns over, because you were 17 and the road felt like a promise. Parents warned, but warnings sounded like leftovers from an older generation that didn't understand. So, daughters stepped off curbs at dusk and trusted strangers. In December 1972, 2 friends, Maureen Sterling and Yvonne Weber, left a skating rink and didn't make it home. Weeks later, off a quiet lane in the hills, a ravine gave up its dead. Bodies dragged from brush, stripped of the personhood that clothes pretend to protect, strangled, discarded. Deputies closed the trunk of their fear and drove back to town with sirens off. The newspapers wrote carefully, as if gentleness on the page might protect the living. It didn't. More vanished. A college student who painted and saved tips for a bus ticket. A high schooler who wrote notes and bubble letters and signed them with hearts. A girl headed to her grandmother's, who never arrived. The terrain repeated like a bad dream. Embankments, creek beds, thickets of scrub oak and manzanita, the hush of damp leaves. Again and again, strangulation. Again and again, no obvious prints, no fibers someone could swear by, just the wind at the scene and the weight of the ground above the truth. The sheriff's office filled a map with pins, red threads stretched between counties like veins. Detectives drove the routes at midnight to feel how the curves hid a pulled-over sedan, how a single pair of taillights could vanish behind a fold of hill. They checked vans with dirty carpets, sedans with trunk liners scrubbed too clean. They wrote down names, boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, men who drank too early in the day, men who liked the woods too much, and then crossed most of them out. At home, they scoured their clothes twice before hugging their own kids. The families built their lives around absence. Mothers kept rooms as museums, concert stubs on corkboard, a stack of school books half read, a sweater still holding the faint citrus of old shampoo. Fathers learned to make coffee at 3 in the morning, then learned how to drink it cold. You can get used to almost anything, people say. They don't mean the calls where a deputy clears his throat before speaking, or the walk across gravel to identify what's left of your child. You don't get used to that. Hitchhiking thinned, then almost stopped. The posters went up. Do not hitchhike. A killer is on the roads. Some stores kept a jar by the register for cab money. Some teachers gave late rides home. Some kids made a pact to wait until they could go in pairs. Still, habit is stubborn. A few stepped out alone because the night was familiar, because the next ride always came, until it didn't. On those nights, the ravines remembered their part of the story. Whoever hunted here knew the land like a second skin. He chose shoulders with blind curves and pullouts with soft dirt that kept quiet. He knew which ranch roads dead-ended into dark. He could turn off his lights and coast. Maybe he dressed neat enough to calm a mother if she saw him, but knew how to wipe down vinyl and screws when the drive was over. He took trophies or he didn't. He bound or he asked nicely. He lied like a friend or smiled like a salesman. Each detail felt close and far at the same time, like a face you're sure you've seen but cannot place. Theories grew because evidence did not. Some swore it was a single careful man. Others whispered it was 2 who worked together, one to charm, one to finish. Sonoma had its loners and its liars. its quiet carpenters and athletic coaches and men who volunteered on search parties. The Zodiac still haunted headlines, and later people threaded these murders onto the same string. Ted Bundy passed through the state in those years. After he was caught, some tried to fit him to the ravines, but the puzzle never held. Timelines unstitched, methods balked, witnesses wavered. The monster kept the shape of fog. And then there were the girls themselves, who deserve more than a killer's silhouette. They took driver's ed and failed parallel parking. They drew daisies on their notebooks, argued with sisters over borrowing sweaters, wrote notes that said, "Call me," with too many exclamation points. A few had begun to keep diaries, small spiral books with locks more symbolic than secure. Inside were grand ideas about moving to San Francisco, about growing their hair longer, about being bolder next year. They were not cautionary tales while they lived. They were futures in progress. The 1970s changed as the murders multiplied. Parents who had come of age shrugging off the rules learned new ones and taught them hard. Keys between fingers. Don't walk alone after dark. Check the back seat. Write the plate down, even if the driver is handsome, especially if he is handsome. The culture lurched from openness to suspicion, from "it'll be fine" to "it could happen." By the decade's end, the sight of a thumb extended at the shoulder felt not brave, but doomed. The road had lost its promise. Time moved on. The work did not stop. Cold case detectives pulled boxes from high shelves and spread reports across new desks. They sent what they could to laboratories with machines that didn't exist back when bell-bottoms did. Exhumations were discussed, then done with trembling consent. Bones gave up some answers and declined others. Letters arrived from prisons with confessions that bent too easily under questions. Tips flickered and went out. The map remained on the wall, a geometry of grief. There are memorials now, informal and exacting. A bouquet wired to a fence, a roadside cross the color of rain, a span of guardrail with initials burned into it, letters fused by someone who needed to leave proof they had stood there and said the names aloud. Some families moved away because every drive became a corridor of reminders. Some stayed because they would not abandon their daughter's last landscape to the man who hunted in it. On anniversaries, candles bloom on gravel like a small, stubborn garden. Years later, you can still drive the same roads and feel the story folding in. The fog returns like a ritual. Headlights find nothing, and then someone standing where the shoulder is no wider than a sigh. Only it's a memory, a bruise in the air that looks like a girl. You tell yourself you're projecting. You tell yourself you understand the past because you know how it ends. But the truth is that it hasn't ended. Unsolved is a tense that keeps happening, and there are questions the ravines will not answer. Not for you, not for the detectives, not even for the families who have waited long enough to be tired of time. If you were to stop on one of those nights and turn your engine off, the quiet would feel thicker than darkness. You could hear water somewhere, a thread unwinding under leaves. You could imagine a car idling just out of sight, the driver's wrist resting casually over the wheel, a practiced voice saying, "Hop in, I'm headed that way." This is the part where someone says no. This is the part where history rewrites itself kindly. But history, stubborn as gravel, remembers how it really went. In Sonoma's back roads, trust became a trap, and the hills learned a vocabulary of loss. The Santa Rosa Hitchhiker Murders are a ledger of missing answers and unspent rage. They turned an ordinary habit into a warning and left a generation teaching the next to survive in smaller circles. Somewhere, perhaps, a box in a basement still holds the fiber, the hair, the microscopic hinge that will finally fix a name to the fog. Until then, the story lives where it began. Easy smiles, an open door, the hush of tires rolling into the dark, and the long quiet that follows. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.